We'll get started here and remember which buttons to push. Here we are again, guys. Good morning at the Moot House. And boy, the seasons are changing. I'm back in long sleeves this morning. I heard the early this morning when I was up, the furnace kicked on for the first time this season. Yeah, I don't know why, but it did. It wasn't really that cold in our home, but it did. So I decided to switch to long sleeves this morning and back in my vest. So here we are. September 5th or 6th? What is it? 6th? 6th today? September 6th. All right. All righty. Well, you've seen this slide. I won't make comments on it. We know we're near the end of our study. We're studying the blessings of Jacob to his 12 sons. And last time we were together, we looked at this interlude or an interjectionary prayer of Jacob, kind of not really mid-cycle. He's about 3/4 of the way through, 2/3, and he just appeals to God for deliverance. And we looked at that idea, and this is a review of the last slide last week, calling for deliverance. And it was the idea last week that as we mature as believers in Christ, the idea, a part of that experience should be to the ability to engage the pain. And it's really the message of the gospel. That's what the Word becoming flesh was, as Steve was talking earlier this morning, was the idea of God himself engaged the pain of humanity, and thus, and it's the same calling of us as believers. We are called to the cross. Our natural response as human beings is to delay the pain, ignore the pain, numb the pain of humanity. But we are called as Christians, followers of Christ, to engage those things. And as we engage, we feel the pain. We use the word empathize, which would be a very close summary of what that word means. But we feel the pain. We actually take the pain on, as Jesus did. Word became flesh. But what we have, we don't have to end it here. What we can do, have the ability, is to release that pain back to God, who is the carrier of all human pain. We release that. But through that process, something wonderful happens. There are people gifted within this area, although we generally are called as Christians to do this. But in intercession, the idea of intercessory prayer is the idea of engaging what is occurring, somehow carrying that burden and then releasing back to God is a very fundamental idea of what that is all about. So that's what I interpreted as this interjectory prayer last week, is Jacob in the midst of this carrying, being able to see into the future of what is going to be occurring in his family. He just stops for a moment and calls out to God for future deliverance in areas that, of course, yet future, not yet happening. So that was all last week. Now this week, would someone read the text? We're at 49, verse 19, the blessing to Gad. And would somebody just read verse 19?
Gad will be attacked by a band of raiders, but he will attack them at their heels.
Okay, that's it. Okay, that's it for Gad. As for Gad, this is the New American Standard. As for Gad, raiders shall raid him, but he shall raid their heels. So the idea that he is somehow going to suffer conflict, attack, but he's going to attack back. Attack back. Yeah. Okay. So there's some interesting things going on grammatically within this verse. And I wrote it here. It says, in Hebrew, the name Gad sounds like raid. Now, it doesn't in our text, but this verse is really one long pun. And so in English, we would read we would read it like this, Gad. Okay, as for Gad, I'm just using the word, I'm transliterating it here. In the Hebrew, this word right here, and I'll go down there in just a minute. The two letters, can you guys see those?
Mm-hmm.
The two letters, that's a Gimel and a Dalet. And that's the word Gad. Two letters, there is no vowel in between, but it's the way, do you see those little marks around there? Those were added to give us the ability to pronunciate it. In the original language of the Old Testament, you don't have those little markings, but it's the Gimel and the Dalet, and I'll talk about that, G and D. And so it just says Gad. But we, in our way of casting it, we'd say, as for Gad, Gadders, raiders, will gad him. But he will gad them at their heels. You get the idea? It's a pun. Because the word Gad is like the word raid in Hebrew. So for us to put it into any kind of correlation, that's how I interpret it. You know, gadders will gad him, but he will gad them at their heels. It's a pun. So in Hebrew, it looks like this. And you go this way in Hebrew. It says Gad, Gad, and then down here, Gadud. This is Gadud, raiders. As for Gad, Gadud, raiders. And this one says this would be Ye Gudnu shall raid him. Ye Gudnu. Can you hear the GD sound being used? And then, but he would be Wahu, Ye Gud Akab. So these little shaded areas show the GD place. 1, 2, 3, 4 out of 6 words have the GD Gad. And so it's a play on words. And so anyway, that I think that's all I need to say about that. So, you know, we don't really make the connection, but in the Hebrew language, Hebrew readers would make the correlation. Yeah. So that was no extra charge for that. The birth background that we've been looking at to every son, it's in Genesis 30, verse 9 through 11. Could somebody read that? I didn't put the text up here. I missed that. But could somebody read Genesis 30, 9 through 11 to give us the birth context?
When Leah saw that she had stopped bearing, she took her maid Zilpah and gave her to Jacob as a wife. Leah's maid Zilpah bore Jacob a son. Then Leah said, "How fortunate." So she named him Gad.
Okay. First son of Zilpah, seventh son of Jacob. Leah's handmaid. You got the connection? And what were her words? Arthur, what were her words at the birth of Gad?
How fortunate.
How fortunate. Again, we've got this competition going on in the household of Jacob. Who can bear the most children? Either naturally or via a handmaid, concubine. And so, what I've done then, and I've taken this birth context and then looked at the person, Gad, the man Gad, and all of his sons, and said, is there any correlation to his birth context to his life? And I don't, the only connection I can make between Gad's birth context and the blessing here years later is the idea of struggle. Jacob's words to his son Gad are about struggle. Gad, you will be attacked, but he doesn't use the second person. He uses the third person in the blessing. Did you note that? He's talking about Gad in the third person. He will do this. This is what he will do. But there's going to be struggle in Gad's life. Well, we're asking, who's Gad? I don't see anything in Gad's, the only struggle I see in Gad's life is his birth context. He's brought into a family of struggle. There is struggle going on, this competitive struggle within the family. Later, his father identifies him with struggle, Gad with the same idea of struggle. That's the only correlation I could make. That's not true with all of the sons, though. Some of the truth is very apparent that their birth context had impact on the man himself, but that is not apparent in the scriptures with Gad. So now we look at, like we've been doing, Bill, week after week with the blessings, we now look at the tribal allocation.
My expectations were,
We're about done though.
yeah.
So Gad's tribal allocation is notice here's Israel, and here's where the allocation was to be. But during the story of Gad and Reuben is that during the time of the allocation, that would have been in Joshua's, the book of Joshua, these two guys requested property on the other side of Jordan. There's the Jordan River. They wanted another piece of property. Well, that kind of torqued off Moses. And you can read about this in Joshua 13, 24 through 28, or Numbers 32. And so there was an interaction there. But then they counter-responded and said, listen, if you give us that, if you allow us to settle over there, we will help the rest of the tribes settle there. We'll enter in and we'll help you guys get all settled, then we'll take this other piece of property. That was very loose interpretation. But then Moses went back and had his quiet time, whatever he did, and said, okay, we'll agree to that. So that's really the point here is they settled, Gad and Reuben settled what's called Transjordan, beyond Jordan on the other side. So there's another piece to this. Okay, so they chose that. Now I'm going to start to bring this together. We've looked at the idea of struggle, actually right here, conflict, struggle, and then at his birth context, good fortune. So there's two primal ideas here. The idea that he was born and his name means good fortune, and the idea that there is conflict and struggle going to be in his life. So what do you do with this? So this is what my thoughts were this week. As I see it, so I go back, and the way I think and do this, I go back, okay, what do I do with these two ideas? And so here are my thoughts here. First of all, I see no correlation in regard to Gad as the man. I just don't see anything out of his character and being what is recorded in the scriptures, nothing that would really tie back where he acted out either good fortune or conflict. I don't see it. Maybe it's there, but I don't see it. Number two, now we go out, because this is prophetic literature here, and so Jacob we're trying to find, what does this mean, this prophetic utterance, and so I don't see a correlation here, but now we look at the blessing is prophetic in that during the time of the occupation, that's Joshua, 400 years yet future. From the day it was spoken at Jacob's hospice bed, about 400 years yet future, Gad, the tribe of Gad, along with Reuben, the tribe, chose a difficult path. They purposely chose something more difficult in life for some reason. They liked the property. And they were willing to extend themselves beyond what the other tribal members were doing in order to gain that property. They chose a difficult path. That's where we're going to go with this. Later, during the time of David, 1,000 years yet future, 1,000 years from here, the men of Gad were known as valiant and skillful warriors. Could somebody read, if you can find it in your Bible, you can just Google 1 Chronicles 5:18 and then 12:8. Could somebody look those two? This is good. Just kind of tie it here, so you see that I'm not lying to you.
I've got 5:18.
Yeah. Okay.
The Reubenites, the Gadites, and the half-tribe of Manasseh had 44,760 men ready for military service, able-bodied men who could handle shield and sword, and who could use the bow, and who were trained for battle.
Okay, good, thank you. Now how about 12:8? It's in the same book, just a few pages over.
From the Gadites, there went over to David at the stronghold in the wilderness, mighty and experienced warriors, expert with shield and spear, whose faces were like the faces of lions, and who were swift as gazelles upon the mountain.
So what I'm deriving here is that the choice of the difficult path, and there may be no connection, I don't know, but the choice as the tribe to go occupy outside of safety in a more difficult area, Transjordan, could it had a connection to years and years of learning how to fight? These guys knew how to fight. And they were known at the time of David as valiant and skillful warriors with spear and shield and so forth. So I see a correlation there in this, that the blessing going back now 1,000 years, Jacob saw into the future the men of Gad who were struck under battle many times because they chose to settle in a more difficult area outside of the protective realm of the other tribes. Kind of like they chose, remember the days of the Westerns where the wagons would circle up? The idea is stay in the way, stay in the circle. These guys chose to go pitch their tent outside the circle. And there was a cost to that. But 1,000 years later, they had learned how to fight. And thus, for the chronicle passages, 5:18 and 12:8. So that's the connection I have made, as I see it. So what I'd like to do these last 10 minutes is for you guys to discuss at your tables. What is it? I've been purposely kind of introducing the idea of the more difficult path, the path less chosen, right? The poem. I'd like for you guys to talk about what on earth, I didn't put it like that, but what would cause anybody to take a more difficult path? Why would anyone want to take a more difficult path? Question one. But then, as we do that, we can't help but think about the choices that we have made. Because we can relate to this. I mean, we as men have had choices our entire life. Do I take the easy path, this path, or this path? Do I take this path or this path? And I would put money on the fact that every man in this room did not choose one path over the other because it was easy. I would venture to say every man in this room has chosen a more difficult path at some point in your life. So let's, at our table, please talk about this and launch the discussion with what on earth causes a person to choose a more difficult path, and then go from there. So have some fun with it. And then I'll round this all up. I'll round this all up in about 8 minutes. So.
Okay, sir.